Hello, Teens John. Welcome back. It's been a while. I hope everyone is enjoying their beginning of summer so far. So we're going to be continuing our Teens Run Lunch Club / Run Club lessons during the summer. So I hope you will find these fun and interesting. Today, I wanted to, in light of a lot of things that are happening around the world right now, important things that are happening, I wanted to talk a little bit about how food justice and racial justice intersect each other. And you might think they have nothing to do with each other, but they actually have a lot more. They depend on one another a lot more than you might think. So for our warm-up today, I want us to just get thinking about a topic of food insecurity. And to do this, I brought 2 apples right here, and I want you to just imagine that I have these 2 apples and I have 10 students, 10 Teens Run students sitting in front of me right now, and I want you to think about the different possibilities in which I can distribute these apples to my students. It doesn't have to be fair, distribution doesn't have to be equal, or it can be, but I just want you to think really quickly about the ways that we can distribute these. So I know one way can be just to, I can give both of these apples to one student. But in that case, obviously you're going to have 9 other students who don't get anything at all. I could give 1 apple to one student and another apple to another student, but obviously, again, you're going to have students who are not getting anything at all. So the most fair, one might say, is to cut these apples up 5 slices each, so you have 10 slices. Each person gets a slice. In that case, everyone is getting a portion of the apple. And I wanted to bring up a term called scarcity here because in this case, these apples are a scarce resource because there is not, it's something that everyone wants, hopefully, in the moment, but we might not have enough to go around. And scarcity in general is just a lack of a resource, and that resource could be food, could be money, education, housing. And then another term that I wanted to have you think about is the term opportunity cost. And you might not have heard of this term before, but opportunity cost is, the definition is the next best alternative that must be given up when a choice is made about using a scarce resource. So in this case, the choice, if we decided to share the apples, to cut these up into 10 slices and give everyone a slice, the choice to share the apple limits everyone's portion. So again, they're only going to get a portion of the apple. Not everyone's going to get a full apple, but everyone will be getting a portion of the apple at least. And so that kind of brings me into the lesson that I wanted to talk about today, which, as I mentioned before, food insecurity and how food insecurity and racial insecurity kind of intertwine. And First, I want to define food insecurity. You might not have heard of this before, but food insecurity is kind of what I was talking about before with these scarce resources. So food insecurity is having a feeling, a risk or a fear of not having consistent access to food that meets your dietary needs, your nutrition needs, or food preferences. And the reason why people live with food insecurity is because we rely on resources, we rely on the resource of food, but we have a scarcity of it. Maybe not necessarily a scarcity of food, but we have an unequal distribution of food to people, where some people have a lot of food and other people don't have access to that same amount of food. An example of this is what is called a food desert. So a food desert is an area in which it is difficult to buy affordable or good quality food, or you have to travel up to a certain distance, so up to like a couple miles in order to get to the nearest grocery store is a food desert. So it means that you live in a place where there's really no access to good quality foods at all. And it might be surprising, you might think, well, I don't live in a food desert, but there are actually more food deserts around the country than you might think. And for example, in New York City, when you think of New York City, you probably don't think of a food desert, but there are little pockets in the city where in one area you might have high quality restaurants and healthy supermarkets, and there's a lot of gardens and fresh fruits and vegetables, but you might walk up maybe a couple blocks or a mile up the road, and then what you're going to see is a lot of convenience stores and candy stores, liquor stores, fast food joints. And so even though you see all those like I was talking about, those fast food joints, convenience stores, those are not really nutritious, healthy options, and there might not be any grocery stores in that area, and so that would be considered a food desert because you don't have access to grocery stores and fresh fruits and vegetables and produce. There are different types of barriers that limit that. When someone lives in a food desert, limits their access to these foods. So like I mentioned before, it could be a physical barrier, so a decent or even like average supermarket might be miles away and you don't have any direct transportation to this grocery store. Another barrier is economical barrier. So there might be a very high quality upper class grocery store right around the corner, but obviously you might not be able to afford the food in there because it's a lot more expensive than normal. A lot of times if people don't have the resources to buy all this high quality or this expensive fresh fruits and vegetables, then they're going to turn to less healthier options because those are the cheaper options. And I know when we think of, let's say for example, DC, Washington DC, we don't think of somewhere that might be a food desert, but in fact I wanted to bring up a couple stats for you guys. And in 2017, our own Ward 8 in Washington, D.C., that neighborhood had only one grocery store for over 78,000 residents. So just think about that. It had one grocery store. There was probably plenty of fast food chains, of convenience stores, liquor stores, candy stores, but they only had one actual grocery store in 2017. And so that was considered a food desert at that time. And also at that time, the roughly 1 in 7 households in the whole District of Columbia, was food insecure. So it's not something that is limited to only, a couple people around the country. Food insecurity is a big problem that we have. And a lot of times I think even myself, in the past we think, okay, well, this is a problem, but they just need to eat healthier, You might blame people for their food choices. They always have the choice to buy healthier food. It might be a little bit more expensive, but they always have that choice, right? Because a lot of us think we have we have total control when it comes to choosing what we do or do not eat. But the reality is that if you have a parent or a guardian working 12-hour days and they live miles away from a good grocery store, and when they get home at 9 p.m., the last thing that they're going to have time to do is to go grocery shopping. So the easiest option is going to be to stop at a takeout or a fast food restaurant in order to get food quick and feed their family in the cheapest way possible. So unfortunately, these food deserts do disproportionately affect certain people, and they disproportionately affect people of color. And we wonder why this might be so. And a lot of this is a product of history. So low-income residents and people of color have been segregated in the past into certain areas of cities, not just Washington, D.C., but cities all around the country. They were segregated into certain areas because of what's called redlining. So the government designated certain areas to be unworthy of having these nice supermarkets in them because they didn't think they would be profitable in that area. And so the way that we segregated these societies around class, income, and race has turned into what we now see as these food deserts, and why people are struggling with food insecurity mostly in these areas. So I don't want you to think that this is a hopeless situation. It's a difficult situation, but I don't think it's a hopeless one. And I think there are several things that we can do to kind of better the situation. And one of the most important things, I'm by no means an expert on all of this, but I think that one of the most important things we can do is acknowledge this intersection between food insecurity and racial injustice and health injustice, because they all snowball and work together to create this bigger problem. And second of all, I think that the personal choices we make today, an important one being what we put onto our plate, but the personal choices that, we also make for how we treat other people and the way that we talk to people and the way that we think about other people. All of these have an overwhelming effect on beginning to combat the racial injustices that we do see. And by combating food injustice and racial injustice and health injustice, we can start to slowly pick away at this bigger problem that we're seeing around the world.